Sorry I was late.
All good.
You're always late, so what?
Shh. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Okay, you're on, brother. Recording and everything is charged up. Sorry you got a small group tonight, but don't forget this is going out.
That's all right.
All right.
Okay. So, let's see. Is it recording now? Usually I see, okay, there it is. Hey guys, I am continuing the series on Jubilees. I think Jackson has this numbered as the 14th video or something like that.
It depends if it's on a podcast or on YouTube. They're different numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're just taking our time with this because we really want to flesh out as we can the significance of what Jubilees says in connection to the scriptures and how it relates to the Dead Sea Scrolls and what we can glean from the information found in Jubilees. So that's it. We're going to continue. Last week we ended with Abraham's death, and there's actually a final part about after Abraham died that speaks about Abraham, and I didn't read that last week, but I'm gonna read that this week, and I'm gonna share some interesting things about it. So let me get to the chapter. I think it was chapter 22. No, we ended with chapter 22, but it's chapter 23 where we're starting today. So as we discussed last time, we discovered the origin of the whole phrase Abraham's bosom that we see in the Gospel of Luke. I presented evidence last time that phrase actually originates from the book of Jubilees and the whole story of Abraham's death. And so that's where we leave off. Abraham has now died, and Jacob is lying in he wakes up, and Abraham is cold as ice, it says, and Jacob at that moment realized he was dead. It says he arose from his bosom and ran and told his mother. Then Rebekah told Isaac. And this is also a slight detail that's kind of interesting because we know that Jubilees tells us that it was Esau that Isaac was more fond of, whereas Jacob was closer to his mother. So it's interesting that the first person Jacob tells about Abraham dying is his mom instead of his dad. He didn't go to Isaac to tell him that Isaac's dad died. He went and told his mom. So that's kind of an interesting family dynamic there that we are shown a little peek into. And it says, so it looks like here that it was in the middle of the night because they went to see Abraham and they had to bring a lamp, it says. And they found him lying dead. So it says, let's see. So Ishmael also found out and came and mourned over his father. So it wasn't just an isolated thing. It was Abraham's family. It says, it also says that the sons of Keturah, which were also Abraham's sons, they came as well to mourn for him. They mourned 40 days. And I've mentioned this in other teachings. There's a very amazing concept about the number 40 that we see throughout Scripture. It appears to have a meaning of 40 days seem to have the meaning of, how would I put this? A picture of bringing to completion. Like, for example, there's evidence that it takes 40 days to change your body's composition to a positive or negative. So if you get an addiction, you basically, your body changes to accommodate that addiction in a period of 40 days, from what I've seen, and it goes in the opposite direction for good. If you brush your teeth every morning, after 40 days, if you were to do that consistently, it'll become second nature to you. Number 40 all throughout Scripture, it appears to have that same meaning, both in a positive and negative sense. That is the permanency of a nature, like a second nature. And you're going to see that you see that 40 a lot, especially with mourning after someone dies, as well as with birth, because we know the Torah says after someone's born, 40 days of purification if it's a man, or if it's a male, and 80 days if it's a female. So this principle of 40 you see a lot. Now, we are told that after the flood, well, it says before the flood, the lives of the forefathers were 19 Jubilees. But after the flood, they began to grow less than 19 Jubilees, and to decrease in Jubilees, and to grow old quickly, and to be full of their days by reason of manifold tribulation and the wickedness of their ways, with the exception of Abraham. So we're told that Abraham was a unique exception. He was very righteous and very good health. It says Abraham was perfect in all his deeds with the Lord, and well-pleasing in righteousness all the days of his life. So by Jubilee count, Abraham didn't really do anything wrong in his entire life. He was perfect in everything, and he was well-pleasing all the days of his life. In the prayer of Manasseh, it actually has Abraham had never sinned. Scriptures like the Shepherd of Hermas, which say that some people have lived their lives without sin. Now, most of us have sinned, especially because of the world we have been raised up in. That's not an excuse, but it helps give context. But we have to remember that sin is not a disease, it's a choice, and you don't have to do it. So look up to people like Abraham and Noah, the models of our faith, to show this is what we could be if we try harder and try to be the best we can be. If we be the best we can be as righteous as Abraham. And it will have positive impact on our health and our lives in general. Now, it says that although Abraham was righteous, this is Jubilees 23, verse 10, it says he did not complete 4 Jubilees in his life because he grew old by reason of the wickedness and was full of his days. So what Jubilees is seeming to say is that because other people were wicked, Abraham died sooner than he would have. If Abraham had not been surrounded by wicked people and living in a wicked area of the world, he would have lived a longer life. This gives us a principle that when you associate with sinners, or when you are in an area where there's full of sin, you will be negatively impacted by it. You will be harmed both spiritually, uh, physically, mentally, psychologically. And just think about how, like, for example, with second-hand smoke, if you hang around people who are smoking, you're going to breathe in some of that toxic air. It's the same thing with wickedness. If you're around people who are angry, it's very easy for that anger to rub off, that negative energy to rub off on you, and then you will be filled with anger in times. And in general, wicked people have unhealthy aspects about them in a literal sense. And so this unhealthy stuff about these wicked people can be contagious, and that can lead to harming the health of otherwise righteous people. And yeah, and Jackson says, worn down by the sins of those you care about. Absolutely. If you're their caretaker and stress can cause people to die. And not only that, but we do have reason to believe that the willpower is a very strong power over how long you live. Like so many instances of married couples where one dies and then within a year the other person in their couple ends up dying, almost like they die of heartbreak, or they don't have the will to live anymore because their beloved partner that they've been with their whole life has died all of a sudden. So there's definitely something to the connection between the logical aspects of righteousness and your physical health. But there is a passage, I don't know it off the top of my head right now. It's somewhere in the Nazarene Acts, either in recognitions or homilies section, where it says the same thing that Jubilees says. It actually says that by being surrounded by sinful people, that impacts your health in a negative way. I would have to find where that is, but I don't have enough time to find out at the moment. But I know I'm very confident that it is somewhere in that book. If I find it, I can maybe share it in the group or something, or post it as a comment on on this video once it's loaded to YouTube or something. So at any rate, it says, in all the generations which shall arise from this time until the day of the great judgment shall grow old quickly, before they complete 2 Jubilees, and their knowledge shall forsake them by reason of their old age, and all their knowledge shall vanish away. And in those days, if a man lived... Now listen to this. This is a cool part. And in those days, if a man live a jubilee and a half of years, they shall say regarding him, he has lived long, and the greater part of his days are pain and sorrow and tribulation, and there is no peace. For calamity falls on calamity, and wound on wound, and tribulation on tribulation, and evil tidings on evil tidings, and illness on illness, and all evil judgments such as these, one with another, illness and overthrow, and snow and frost and ice, fear and chills and torpor and famine and death and sword and captivity, and all kinds of calamities and pains. And all these shall come on an evil generation which transgresses on the earth. Their works are in uncleanness and fornication, and pollution and abominations. Then they shall say, I'm going to read this. It's a little long, but then I'm going to elaborate on what we read. So, and this is again chapter 23. So it says, I'll just read. I think I read verse 14, but I'll read it again. And all these shall come on an evil generation which transgresses on the earth. Their works are uncleanness and fornication and pollution and abominations. Then they shall say, the days of the forefathers were many, unto 1,000 years, and were good. But behold, the days of our life, if a man has lived many, are 80 years and 10. And if he is strong, 80 years. And those evil. And there is no peace in the days of this evil generation. And in that generation the sons shall convict their fathers and their elders of sin and unrighteousness, and of the words of their mouth, and the great wickedness which they perpetrate, and concerning their forsaking the covenant which the Lord made between them and him, that they should observe and do all his commandments and his ordinances and all his laws, without departing either to the right hand or the left. For all have done evil, and every mouth speaks iniquity, and all their works are uncleanness and abomination, and all their ways are pollution, uncleanness, and destruction. Behold, the earth shall be destroyed on account of all their works, and there shall be no seed of the vine and no oil, for their works are altogether faithless, and they shall all perish together, beasts and cattle and birds and all the fish of the sea, on account of the children of men. And they shall strive one with another, the young with the old, and the old with the young, the poor with the rich, the lowly with the great, and the beggar with the prince, on account of the law and the covenant. For they have forgotten commandment and covenant, and feasts and months and Sabbaths and Jubilees and all judgments. And they shall stand swords and war to turn them back into the way, but they shall not return until much blood has been shed on the earth, one by another. And those who have escaped shall not return from their wickedness to the way of righteousness, but they shall all exalt themselves to deceit and wealth, that they may each take all that is his neighbor's, and they shall name the great name, but not in truth and not in righteousness. And they shall defile the Holy of Holies with their uncleanness and the corruption of their pollution. And a great punishment shall befall the deeds of this generation from the Lord, and he will give them over to the sword and to the judgment and to captivity, to be plundered and devoured. And he will wake up against them the sinners of the Gentiles, who have neither mercy nor compassion, and who shall respect the person of none, neither old nor young, nor anyone, for they are more wicked and strong to do evil than all the children of men. And they shall use violence against Israel, and transgression against Jacob. And much blood shall be shed upon the earth, and there shall be none to gather and none to bury. In those days they shall cry aloud, and call and pray that they may be saved from the hand of the sinners, the Gentiles, but none shall be saved. And the heads of the children shall be white with gray hair, and a child of 3 weeks shall appear old like a man of 100 years, and their stature shall be destroyed by tribulation and oppression. And in those days the children shall begin to study the laws, and to seek the commandments, and to return to the path of righteousness. And the days shall begin to grow many, and increase amongst those children of men, till their days draw nigh to 1,000 years, and to a greater number of years than was the number of the days. And there shall be no old man, nor one who is satisfied with days, for all shall be children and youths. In all their days they shall complete and live in peace and in joy, and there shall be no Satan nor any evil destroyer. Their days shall be days of blessing and healing. And at that time the Lord will heal his servants, and they shall rise up and see great peace, drive out their adversaries. And the righteous shall see and be thankful, and rejoice with joy forever and ever, and shall see all their judgments and all their curses on their enemies. And their bones shall rest in the earth, and their spirits shall have much joy. And they shall know that it is the Lord who executes judgment, and shows mercy to hundreds and thousands, and to all that love him. And do thou, Moses, write down these words, for thus are they written, and they record on the heavenly tablets for testimony for the generations forever. So that's the chapter 23. As I said, text, so I'm going to now elaborate on what we just read. So I hinted to you guys earlier that there was just something very cool, and I'm going to point it out to you now. Are you guys aware of how there's actually one psalm in the which claims to be a psalm authored by Moses? Are you want to comment?
Which one?
Yeah.
It's
I
Psalm
will
90.
sing unto the Lord. Is that it?
Say it again. Oh, Jackson, you muted again.
The horse and the rider?
No, that's in Exodus, but this is actually a psalm in the
Oh,
Psalms.
in Jubilees.
No, in the Book of Psalms.
Yeah, I remember there's a song of Moses in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking
Why are you pulling our taffy here?
about. Because it's connected.
Which
So
one?
Psalm 90 starts off with a subscription, a superscription that says a prayer of Moses, the man of God. So this is a prayer that Moses made. Now wait a minute. Where did Moses, like, where did we get this prayer? Where did the writers, the compilers of the Book of Psalms get this Moses prayer? It's not in Genesis. It's not in the Torah. Where did this prayer come from? It came from the original Torah, the Dead Sea Scrolls, or from another book of Moses. And we know that the ancients tell us there was a couple books that Moses wrote. Testament of Moses was one. Book of Jubilees is another. Assumption of Moses is closely connected to Testament of Moses, but it appears to be written probably by Joshua or the successors after Moses, because Assumption of Moses records Moses' death. But the Testament of Moses records Moses' life, gives an overview of his life. So it is this specific part, this Psalm 90, that has a striking connection with the long read from Jubilees. Listen, this is Book of Jubilees. Everything that was just spoken about death and shortness of life, Moses was supposed to write down. So those words were spoken to Moses. With that in mind, think about Moses making this prayer in Psalm 90. Think about him with Jubilees in mind, what we just read, with that context of Jubilees. Now listen to what Moses says in Psalm 90. He says, "You turn man to destruction and say, 'Return, O children of men. For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past. And a watch in the night, you carry them away a flood. They are like asleep. In the morning they are like grass which grows up. In the morning it flourishes and grows. Evening it is cut down and withers. For we have been consumed by your anger, and by your wrath we are terrified. You have set our iniquities before you, our secrets in the light of your countenance. For all our days have passed away in your wrath. We finish our years like a sigh. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. Who knows the power of your anger? For as the fear of you is your wrath, so teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom." So that's not the whole song. That's the main.
Isn't that 91? 91?
It's Psalm 90 in Masoretic text. I think it's 89 in the Septuagint.
Okay.
But yeah, so Psalm 91 is the exorcism psalm to cause demons to flee or something. But so look at these phrases here. I'm going to highlight, not the whole thing, I'm going to highlight a phrase from Jubilees and connect it with a single phrase in Psalm 90. So, okay. Then they shall say, the days of the forefathers were many, unto 1,000 years, and were good. But behold, the days of our life, if a man has lived many, are 70. And if he is strong, 80 years. And those evil, and there is no peace in the days of this evil generation. So what is that? 70, that's 60 plus 10, that's 70 years. And if he is strong, 80 years, that's 80 years. So if a man has lived many, they will say he lived 70 years. And if he is strong, 80 years, and those evil. Psalm 90, again, Moses speaking. The days of our lives are 70 years, and if by reason of strength, 80 years. Yet their boast is only labor and sorrow. That sounds too similar to be coincidence. The phraseology there, both are claiming to originate from the hand of Moses. And it's the exact same topic and the same phraseology. So there's definitely a connection there. Where did this prayer come from, this random prayer in the Psalms, Book of Psalms? It had to come from a writing of Moses somewhere. But we don't have that writing. But whatever this writing was that it came from, it must be very ancient, and it has corroboration of what Jubilees says. So that suggests that Jubilees must also be ancient, because it shares a common source with Psalm 90. And we see that. Does anyone relate to this? Like all this horrible, like what Jubilee said in verse 13, calamity on calamity, wound on wound, tribulation, evil tidings, illness, evil judgments, illness and overthrow, snow, frost, ice, fever, chills, torpor, famine, death, sword, captivity, and all kinds of calamities and pains.
Sure. If you look at the time that a lot of that was probably written in the Second Temple era, they were facing a whole lot of oppression at a certain point, especially with epiphanies. And I'm sorry, I can't remember all the names. I'm not that smart. I can track stuff, but I'm not that smart. But if some of this was redacted or rewritten a little bit and that's what survived, then that's what we're going to get. It may not be so ancient. It may be a tale of the times, you know? And what they're going through is what you get. And that is what we have preserved. We can track it to that time. Beyond that, I don't know if there's anything older that has been preserved. The thread of it has been preserved. But I think as now almost in Christianity, they're applying an ancient thing to a modern topic. What do you think? Sorry.
Well, there's reasons to think that, like, for example, the flood account from Genesis has a lot of parallels with ancient Babylonian stuff. Deuteronomy has a lot of ancient parallels with texts such as Code of Hammurabi and other legal law codes of that time. There's a lot of things like that which suggest that there is certainly the scriptures have been redacted by later scribes, but I think there's a nucleus that these documents stem from that's far more ancient.
Oh, yeah.
And so for the book of Psalms, we have this random prayer. We have a random prayer claiming to be by Moses in book of Psalms, and then you have this book of Jubilees saying the same basic thing that this prayer is saying, both from the word of Moses, but it's such a obscure connection that it doesn't seem likely that the author of Jubilees was like, okay, I'm going to take Psalm 90 and use it to write the book of Psalms. It doesn't seem likely that someone took Jubilees and decided to write Psalm 90. There's a clear connection between the two, but there's also many differences. There doesn't seem to be reason to think that one used the other. So what makes more sense is that both of them come or are connected to an even older source.
I agree.
Which both are derived from.
Yes.
So because of their independent,
Definitely
testifying to the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
What were you going to say, Jackson?
I was going to say definitely. I think that you'll find underlying sources much older for just about everything in there, except maybe sources like the priestly source or something. There's got to be some textual sources underneath there, probably in cuneiform.
We really have no clear idea of the full original extent of what there was. We can only go based off of the evidence that we have, and the doesn't reveal the full picture. It only reveals a part of it. Like, the sea scrolls were found. What did we have to go on? We didn't have that much. I mean, we did have a good amount of stuff, but not nearly as much as we do now that the sea scrolls were discovered. And the 20th century in particular, there were so many amazing finds that completely changed our perspective and really highlighted new aspects of the faith, like Nag Hammadi, the Library of Nag Hammadi, and Dead Sea Scrolls, and just a bunch. There was a lot of apocryphal texts published or discovered, or fragments discovered as well in the 20th century. So it's certainly a very important century and completely changed the perspective just by addition of new evidence. So we never want to get to a point where we say, oh yeah, this definitely is the case, if the evidence is not really there. So all we can say is that we do see major evidence that the scribes changed stuff. My goals for my project, my Bible project, is to try to reconstruct what the original likely said. Keyword likely, because there's no way to know for certain what it definitely said in the original. But an overall picture can be formed by what we have, and I think there is a degree of confidence that we can have that something similar can be reconstructed, something similar to the original. But with absolute confidence, no. Not with absolute confidence.
No, you're doing great. I agree with most all of what you have come up with, because it is absolutely thorough, and you have a greater command of all of these writings than just about anyone. And I just have, here and there are a few small questions, so I apologize.
No, it's all right. So you only agree with most of what I said? You lack faith.
Stop.
No.
I wanted to ask a question about this verse, or this chapter 23, where it says, and in those days the children shall begin to study the laws, to seek the commandments, and return to the paths of righteousness. And the days shall begin to grow many and increase amongst those children of men, till their days draw nigh to 1,000 years. So it seems like it's comparing, the days of the father back then, or the fathers back then, where they lived, up to 1,000 years. And then their lifespan will start to diminish, but then there'll be a day where they start to study the law and their lifespan will begin to increase. Do you think both of those two sides are speaking in a spiritual sense and not a physical sense? Or do you think when it starts to study the law, that actually occurs like after resurrection type deal? Or
Okay, so what we see in the scriptures is that not everyone dies when Messiah returns. And so that means not everyone takes part in the first resurrection. Remember, Revelation speaks of two different resurrections, and not everyone is in the first resurrection. So we're also told that not everybody will die at that time. Eventually,
then it's like those that are alive, remain alive, will also be changed in the blink of an eye and caught up with those that are dead that rise first?
That's going to come first. That's going to come before the general judgment. And I know Jackson probably disagrees with me here, but I believe in a 1,000 year period, and there's different prophecies. It's all based on whether you take the prophecies literally or not. From my perspective, there are a good number of prophecies that seem to speak of a a literal kingdom where the Messiah reigns on earth and he exercises rule. Enoch speaks about this, Book of Enoch, and the tree of life will be shared with people. People can eat of the tree of life, and there will be fruitfulness like never before. You know the one saying, the apocryphal saying of the Messiah when he was asked, will the kingdom be like? And he spoke of how there would be like something like vine branches would produce 1,000 clusters or something crazy like that.
It's in the Gospel of the Hebrews. And Ounieh, I thought that you thought I was infallible. I'm very disappointed now.
Yes,
So
I did. I used to think you were infallible, but then I met you in person and I realized no. And I lived with you too for a month there, right?
that was a trip, all right. Come on back, man. Let's find someone else to harass.
I definitely would like to come back, and I want to go to some future Yahad events at some point.
I hope so.
But
You're always the life of the party.
Thanks. But you know, when I'm not able to go to the Yahad events, I can still communicate, interact with the internet, that computer thing you youngsters call the internet. So, let's see. So basically, to answer your question, we have to take what Jubilee says on what it's trying to say, not necessarily what the truth is. So you could, when you're trying to interpret something, you don't want to make it agree with what you say. You want to look to see what the author is trying to say, whether the author is right or not. So in this case, we have to look at, is the author of Jubilees saying that it's a literal change, or is it implying a spiritual change? And from what I can tell, the context here, it's to me, the author of Jubilees is emphasizing that it is going to be a literal change where it started, where the ancients in the past lived to 1,000 years. Then because of sin, Abraham, because of wickedness, people started dying sooner and sooner and younger, and this even affected people that were perfect like Abraham. And after Abraham, people would live to their fullness around 70 and 80 years, typically. We do know there are some exceptional cases where people live into their hundreds, but that's unusual typically in our time. So what it says is that once they begin to study the law, they will gradually, progressively start getting older and older again. And that is very much connected to the fact that the Torah in Deuteronomy gives laws of blessing for obedience to the law, blessings of long life, health, prosperity, curses for disobedience. Now, this is not the same as the whole prosperity gospel thing, but it has parallels. How does the prosperity gospel flourish in the first place? It takes something true in Scripture and twists it. There are definitely aspects of prosperity, promises found in the Scripture, but they're not guarantees for all people. And in fact, his righteousness is required. Works is required. And even then, it's not a guarantee preventing you from being able to get sick. But you can protect your health and not get sick by the things you do. Other people can poison you, but if you obey the law, you won't poison yourself. That's the key there. So you take care of your health and you will be blessed with long life so long as no one tries to kill you. And if you are blessed with long life but then someone murders you, like Abel was murdered by Cain even though he obeyed the law. The blessing was long life, but he died because he was murdered. So the blessings does not mean that you can't die because of someone else's sin against you, but it means that your health will not be harmed by your actions. Your health will be pure if you keep the law. So many of us started following the truth after we lived a life of sin. Or we may still be in sin in our spiritual walks, depending where we are at. We all are at different paths. So we have to understand that the consequences of our former actions are going to hurt our health still. If you are a smoker your whole life and then you have a change of heart and you become a believer, your belief's not going to undo the damage you did to yourself and to your health from the prior actions you did. So we see here that over time, as more and more people start keeping the law, wickedness will go away and there will be pockets of health, and those pockets of health will lead to more older and older people, and eventually it's going to progress into a full return into the 1,000 years that used to be prior to the flood. And we know from Isaiah, for example, Isaiah prophesies that there will be a day when people will die at 100 years, and they will be considered cursed because they will be considered as dying in their youth at 100 years. So the author of Jubilees, from what I can tell, takes that very literally. And what's also a cool prophecy here is this verse, chapter 23, verse 25. This is a prophecy that's found in other documents too. It's not exclusively in Jubilees. There's a lot of ancient prophecies here that speak of this. It speaks of the heads of the children shall be white with gray hair, and a child of 3 weeks shall appear old like a man of 100 years, and their stature shall be destroyed by tribulation and oppression. It says this will happen in the days when the children begin to study the laws and to seek the commandments and to return to the path of righteousness. So, what are 3 weeks? A week is 7 years, according to Jubilees in the Torah.
Did you lock up?
Hey, you're back now. Oh no, it's gone again.
Desmond, maybe you ought to take over.
I don't know half as much as any of you guys.
Sure you do, man. Come on.
There he is. He's back, but he's muted.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, what was the last thing that I said when I went away? What was the last thing you guys heard me say?
The thought was, I'm sorry, I stepped out to.
So none of you guys were here.
No, I was hearing you, but it was something about the length of life and obedience to the Torah, and then you went on a little bit more about the Torah, and I was like, yeah, this is good, but I forgot exactly what you said. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I was leaving off with...
We're talking about 7 years in Jubilees and what a week is in Jubilees. And
okay, that's right. So a child of 3 weeks, 21 years, shall look like an old man of 100 years, and they shall be white with gray hair. Their heads will be white with gray hair. That, I have talked about this before, but that sounds very... a disease known as progeria. Have you guys ever heard of that disease? Anyone?
like Benjamin Button.
Yes, sir.
It's not quite Benjamin Button. It's instead it is the children age at a very rate. So
really advanced rate, yeah, and they pass away very quickly before they're like 25 or something, and they have the body and the health and the constitution of a 90-year-old, right?
yeah, so they it's all like you know how people say my dog is so many years old, 70 years old in dog years or whatever they say. It's something basically like that where essentially people with progeria age at about the same rate as a dog or a cat.
Much faster, yes.
Somewhere between a dog and a cat is how fast they age. And they look like an old person, but an old child. It's really shocking. They typically have gray hair. Let's see. No, not. I wouldn't say typically, but that is one aspect of they can have gray hair, for example. So now this it says progeria was first described in 1886. It was first described in 1886. That doesn't mean it never existed in the past, but it seems very curious that it was first described in modern times, and lo and behold, in modern times, we are the generation which are seeking the laws. It is in our modern times of the 19th and 20th century when there has been a push to rediscover the past and to turn back to the Torah. And what happened? The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in this same general time period. So there are so many things here. You know, Israel coming back into existence in the 20th century. The law being strived for once again.
Look at me. I've spent a whole life waiting for this time. You know, I'm seeing back when I was a teenager, you know, 14 like you are, Ounieh, that everybody was saying, well, Jesus is coming to rapture and all this. But I began to look at the signs, and even in 67, I remembered the sign then. That was a big sign. And ever since then, all this stuff's coming together. It's just amazing how it is. And then the ideas now that are floated out to us is that we're all living in some kind of simulation or a holograph or something like that. That's a very devilish idea, actually.
Well, I wonder if it's ever come together in the past before and has like cycles where it kind of resets, because you mentioned the 1880 something around there. And I've been doing research into this topic. Around 1850 or so, there was a civilization called the Tartarians, and they were like this huge civilization that basically got forgotten in history. But when you look at all the history going back and the actual verifiable accounts of, you know, things that were actually going on, it seems like there was a big reset all around the world around that time, the mid 1800s.
Jackson,
what were they called?
The Tartarians is the name that that, you know, the guys that are studying this stuff have been talking about, and they covered like most of Russia and down into China and over into Europe a little bit. And supposedly, based on the old maps, they were like the biggest civilization that ever lived, yet no one ever talks about them ever.
You're thinking about the Tatarians. Yeah, if you go out to what's that music? Pandora. Put in Tatarian music. They still make a big splash in contemporary neoclassical music still, but is there a nation there anymore? Tatar? No, there's Tatarstan, but there's no nation there anymore. It was huge. The same thing with Khazaria.
The map.
Where those Jews came from, Khazaria.
And Parthia. Parthia is even older, and we don't even get any of that. That has as much weight as Greece and Rome do at that time. And we don't have any of that in our history books. You have to dig to find it, and there's something there. I recommend the book that Jackson recommended to me. I forget the author. I have it. It's Parthia. Forget what the name of it is. You know, Jackson.
Stephen Collins.
Yes.
Parthia.
Yes. I just bought it, and I've been ripping through it. It's an awesome book.
Or you could read Cassius Dio. He was there.
Yes.
It's all about Parthia.
Yes, and this guy refers to all these Roman authors, but we don't know who recorded all this stuff. They were a huge antagonist of Rome and the second great power, but nobody talks about it. This has happened time after time. It may be cyclical, but like Ounieh says, the stuff coming out of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the stuff coming out of the ground, more understanding of the time between the end of the Second Temple and the birth of our Master, and history in general is just giving us all these clues to know what we need to know, in this time. We are in a special time.
Even this 20-year time slip, that's an incredible, well, everybody knows about it, but nobody's ever written about it until now.
Right.
That is an incredible revelation. And if we want to swallow that, we're going to be able to finally find that Jesus is in the history books, and a lot of them.
And that, I think, yes. And I think that that's why, we're into a point where we're coming to the point where we need to take a stand, all of us. And we've got all this stuff in front of us. We have more information and more understanding than any generation before us did ever, really.
It's just impossible to be echad in anything.
I know.
These days.
And that is the adversary.
That's why we need a strong leader, like Moshe Konachowski or Ounieh Carlson. One of the
No. Well, maybe Ounieh, but no, not Moshe. But Ounieh's got it, man. Keep going, man. You're doing great.
Well, we definitely need. The problem is people don't want to submit to an authority, and understandably so, because so often we've been led astray. So, from my perspective is, we just gotta seek until we find a leader we can trust and believe in. We gotta take a look at all the evidence, and especially these ancient writings, the scriptures, and just take them at face value. Don't blindly believe, but take them at face value and apply them and see what you can learn just by taking at their face value.
Well, nobody's got that kind of mind that you do on these things, and we're looking for a leader. Where is that leader? You've got the mind for it. I'm not sure you get the temperament for it. But, yeah, I think you need two guys. You need a messianic figure and a kingly figure. I think that's obvious. I would follow somebody if I could find any of these guys that were up to date on anything or honest about anything, or a woman for that matter.
Well, we may be the generation leading to someone to lead, because so, for example, my work that I want to do is, as I said, I want to create a version of the Bible. I also want to basically create a database of ancient literature that is rarely seen by people. Like, where do you want to get your history from? Do you want to get it from what they tell you history is? Or do you want to read history yourself and make your own conclusions? Read the writings of Plato yourself, and
No, I agree. Oni, yes. I'm sorry. I agree absolutely. I understand what you're saying because that's where I'm at. I want to read it myself. I trust no man to tell me. I want to read it myself. I want to be like a Berean and measure it out and figure it out. And I love what you're teaching here. This is great. Thank you.
So there's so many stuff I want to do that I have trouble finding the time to get it done. Now, what I have decided to do, one of my friends has asked me for help, and I have agreed to help him in exchange for. He actually suggested this idea to me, and I thought about it, and I thought, you know what, this could actually be a good thing. So he lives in India, and I pay him to do work for me, basically as a scribe. He does stuff on my behalf, and together we are going to be working on many different projects. But in particular, the goals that I have in mind are, as I said, a library, a massive library, and a database of knowledge. So the best way to do that is to comb through all the massive material and figure out what's the most important, and then share that with people and point people to those sources.
And
so
you are the best person to do that because you have read all of this, and with your
no, not all of it.
well, most of it, and with your gifts of memory and understanding and discernment in your reading, you know what's in there. And a lot of us just do not have the time or the place or whatever to get through all that. So that's why I ask you for links, because whatever you have decided that is crucial, I'll read and get what you're talking about. And I love it. So I really appreciate all that you have, done here.
So I want to emphasize that I have focused most of my study on the scriptures and extra books of biblical nature. So many other writings of history I have not had the time anywhere close to really dive into because it's just such a massive amount of material. So I want to emphasize that, of course, I believe the scriptures are the most important in the grand scheme, but I think that other stuff should not be neglected. They should be studied and incorporated into our understanding of scripture, history, science, everything. So my goal is I have found a lot of resources online of different literature. So we have Old English. They're called corpuses. I don't know what the plural is. There's a special plural ending for it.
Corpi?
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. But basically, there's a text corpus for various languages. You got one for Old English. And the people who have made this list every major document written in Old English that we have. There's also a project going on for Greek, the Greek language. Every writing written in Greek, every major writing that we know of, from the beginning of Greek writing up until modern times. By modern, I mean like 1500s when the printing press came to be. They are working on a list of every writing from the beginning to Middle Ages, to the end of the Middle Ages. Not quite Koine. It's like a middle. It's like it starts off as ancient Greek, then it goes to Koine, then it goes to, excuse me, tired from my job. Then it goes to like the next step. There's Koine Greek, then there's modern Greek, and there's one in between the two, like a medieval Greek. So they're working on a project to document every writing. They're doing the same thing with Latin, the Latin language. They're doing the same thing with Coptic language. Different languages they're doing. I think they're eventually going to do something for Arabic. They're doing one for Egyptian. So yeah.
Gaz?
What?
Gaz.
Yeah, I think they're working on one for gays as well.
That would be interesting. That one.
Yes,
I think
yes.
there's a lot lost there.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of material there.
Lost in translation, yeah. Because they were a little island, you know. And I think a lot of truth is in a backwater is good truth. You know what I mean?
Yeah. There's a lot of documents, like for example, in the Vatican Library, they have a secret archives.
Oh
And
yeah.
the archives are secret not because no one can see them, but because they can't be published. They let people see them, but they tell them you can't share with the world what's in
Man,
it.
I tell you what, you can read all these languages pretty much, right?
No.
No?
I have my work cut out to do. I got to learn these languages.
Oh, well, I can read a little bit of Koine. I can read a little Hebrew. I can't read Gaz. Can't read Slavonic. So we need to find somebody who could go in there and find this for us.
Well, it's not just people who can
there.
read it. You also have to have academic connections. You have to have.
Oh yes.
You have to go through a university.
Oh yes. We need an accredited scholar. Yes. Yeah. A stalking horse, as it were. Yes. Which will never happen. Well, it might. Yeshua might.
You gotta be patient, and it'll all come together. But
it will.
There's so many things happening in our time, and what is this happening for? We've got to prepare. We've got to prepare for the final generation. We are not the final generation. We are the generation which precedes the final generation. So our job is to prepare that final generation for what's coming, because what's coming is really bad.
And, well, look, we are strong. There are many, many, many of us, even if they're not, Hebraic, they're Yah-fearers, right? We need to stop listening to all the rubbish that the adversary is putting out and stand. Make a little bit of a stand here and reassert that, no, we're not taking it, and that we are still a nation under Yah, in a way. But if we don't start it now, we could be lost. I don't agree with politics of one side or the other. I just know that what is right, according to Yahweh. And our instructions here that our Master Yeshua gave us, we've got to follow that, and we've got to live it and walk it and do it and get vocal,
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, it's all right.
I'm off my soapbox.
And let me say that Jubilees, so I'm going to go back to Jubilees, okay, guys? But we're not going to go much more through Jubilees, because I don't really want to start a whole new thing with Jubilees, because I don't want to start a new topic only to end it. So we're not going to go beyond chapter 23. But I'm going to wrap up chapter 23 of Jubilees. There's a couple things I want to emphasize, and that the main thing I want to emphasize is verse 19, and that says how everyone will be fighting with each other because they refuse to keep the law. So it says they're striving because of the law and the covenant, because they have forgotten the commandment and the covenant and feasts and months and Sabbaths and Jubilees and all judgments. So if we were keeping the law, if we were keeping righteousness, we wouldn't be fighting. However, some people might disagree with that. Look at the Hebrew Roots movement and how much they're fighting. We're more divisive than ever than almost any other group. Why is that? That is because they are not united in the law. They are united in their own law. And why is that? Because they have forgotten the correct commandment. They have forgotten the correct terms of the covenant. They have forgotten. Allison, you're muted if you're trying to talk. Did you want to talk?
What? Come on, tell me.
What?
What your conclusion is here? This is awesome. Go.
Because they forgot the proper way of keeping the law, that leads to fighting, and that leads to disagreements, and that leads to chaos. When people are not united in the truth, it leads to division and ugliness. And that is why there's so much chaos in this world, because people are not following the law. All this garbage in the USA and in other countries, I don't want to say it's only the USA, but in all these modern countries, they are forsaking laws. That they've become godless. No, there are still a lot of godly people influencing the modern nations of the Western world, and we're much more godly than a lot of other nations out there that are third world countries in many ways. So
I just wonder how they can forget. Maybe the term "forget," I think it's zakar, can also mean like they never knew, because so many people don't know it. Even ones that say a Christian church, they've annulled the law, but they don't even know what it is. Are they talking about them too?
Yeah, well, let's see here.
Well, what does it mean right after that part that you're discussing right now, where it says that with swords they'll turn them back to the way? Is that saying that the people that are following the way are gonna rise up and cause all these people that aren't following the way to follow the way after much bloodshed?
I don't believe that's a literal comment.
And it says, and they shall stand swords and war to turn them back into the way, but they shall not return until much blood has been shed on the earth one by another. So that is probably speaking about the Maccabees who stood the swords and war to turn them back into the way. And then once they've returned, they continued to sin and defiled the Holy of Holies. And then it says in verse 22 that because of these sins that they would be plundered and devoured and given over to the sword in captivity. So it's talking about Israelites and Jews, how they would be sent into exile because of their sins.
Again, yes.
But the verse that we're talking about, verse 19, so the verse that we're talking about is about the ancient Israelites in the Second Temple period. However, this verse is applicable, the principle is applicable to all generations because of what it's saying. It's the logical conclusion. If you are disagreeing with the law, it will cause you to fight with each other. That is a principle that I believe is applicable no matter what. So that's why I was elucidating that verse as if it's applying to our time.
Are you reading that like from a commentary?
No, just
I'm thinking just even Islam's got to be a part of that, because they're supposedly children of Abraham, and all there has been is fighting, not just now, but down through all the generations, and primarily that's what it's about.
Well, as we talked about, it's cyclical, right? As we were saying, these things are repeating itself, and pictures. I mean, it's just kind of interesting because
shadows and types.
There's a prophecy in the book of Enoch, in the weeks prophecy, which Ladio is absolutely adamant that it is referring to. It refers to a man ascending to heaven and the temple being destroyed and the exiles being sent out. He's convinced that it's talking about Messiah ascending into heaven, the second temple being destroyed, and the exiles being scattered in the 1st century AD. But my interpretation, I believe, is definitely correct, and that is, it is referring to Elijah ascending into heaven. It is referring to the first temple being destroyed and the first exile. But so it's funny that the same passage is being interpreted two very different events because they're similar events. And history, as we said, history repeats itself.
It does.
There's evidence in the book of Daniel that there are possibly 2 or even 3 different abomination of desolations.
Yes.
It's not entirely clear. And of course, different sections of Daniel might be written by different authors.
At different times. Yes. Yes. Very good. It depends on the times. Part of it's ancient, I believe, like you do. Part of it may have been redacted or just added to. And, they were scribes. Their position in society were like advisors to the Most High in their government, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So they would learn all the social stuff. They would learn all the history of all the people they were dealing with. But they also were almost all the only people who knew all of, the written or the oral Torah, right? They were educated in that, right?
Yep.
So they knew the scribes were a special class, and I don't think anybody realizes how important the scribes were, right?
Absolutely. I mean,
right.
It's pretty evident in the ancient world how important they were, but the modern world doesn't
get it, right? These guys were like ambassadors for their kings or their rulers or their chief priests, because in some societies the chief priest was the ruler or whatever, but these guys were like ambassadors. They were very highly cultured. They knew about the culture of their own place and other places, other regions. I'm sorry, I'm not putting this very well because I'm not very educated, but I get the gist. But they also wrote down, and what is not really well known is that very few people actually had the art of writing, right?
We don't know the extent.
Right. But it wasn't, from what I've read, it wasn't extremely widespread. So they wrote down what they had, and they were the ambassadors, and they were the diplomats, and they wrote a lot of this stuff, and they didn't always like what their masters did, right? So if their master said, "Oh, we're going to go, with these Seleucids, or we're going to go with the Maccabees," they would rewrite things in a biblical sense because that's what they understood. But they would sort of make it current events as well. Now, this is not necessarily what happens with all scripture or interbiblical or intertestamental stuff, but it could happen, And what you're leading us through is an awesome view on a lot of that. But if people don't understand the history and the society and how all that works, it's just not gonna, they're gonna go whatever. But if they understand how the time was and how these actual people recorded the stuff, it may make more sense. Does it make any sense to you at all? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right.
I'm sorry for interrupting you.
You're banned from future meetings.
Oh, really? Oh, I'm so sorry, Ounieh. I'm sorry.
Just joking.
All right, you do great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I do want to wrap it up. I know Jackson likes to keep these under a certain time.
I'm sorry.
It's all right. I'm just gonna we will be continuing next week. So definitely, more ideas. Feel free to share, and you can ask me more questions, or we can discuss things on Facebook. But I want to say two final notes for this chapter of chapter 23. The emphasis of the Yahad on, as Jackson says, ameliorating. What is it? Ameliorating the earth.
Creation.
Creation.
Yeah.
Well, there's a verse that says, this is talking about ancient Israel, or Second Temple period, but again, it's applicable. It says, behold, the earth shall be destroyed on account of all their works, and there shall be no seed of the vine and no oil, for their works are altogether faithless, and they shall all perish together, beasts and cattle and birds, and all the fish of the sea on account of the children of men. What do we see in our time? We're abusing animals, we're abusing the creation through our modern technologies. Not all technology is bad, but we are definitely causing life to die by what we are doing, and it's going to get even worse and worse. And there's evidence that the earth is being harmed by our actions. There's evidence of animals dying. We've heard the stories about the bees and bees dying off in larger amounts. We've heard the stories of animals washing up on beaches in large amounts for unknown reasons. We've heard of birds, a bunch of birds dying in different areas. So something's going on, and it's because of sin, and it's human sin particularly, which is causing all this chaos and destruction. And the final thing I want to emphasize is in Galatians 2, verse 15. Yes, I am referencing one of the letters of Paul. And it says, we who are Jews by nature and not sinners of the Gentiles. Where does that phrase come from, sinners of the Gentiles? Well, in verse 23 of chapter 23 of Jubilees, it says, and he will wake up against them the sinners of the Gentiles. And in verse 24, it says, they will call and pray that they may be saved from the hands of the sinners, the Gentiles. So this phrase, sinners of the Gentiles, there's just evidence that what Paul wrote and what is throughout the New Testament, there's a lot of allusions to these ancient writings, such as Jubilees, Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's lost on most people, especially Christians. Christians will read the New Testament and not know any of these allusions to ancient literature or connections or phrases that are used. It's perhaps Paul maybe wasn't taking this from Jubilees. Maybe there was another writing that had the same phrase. We don't know exactly. But it's evidence that there were at least some ancient writings which had the same phraseology. So it's not like an innovation of Paul, but it's in that time that this language was being used. So that goes over the mind of most people. But once we realize how heavily grounded the New Testament is in the Second Temple Judaism, it changes our whole perspective of things. And that's pretty much where we're going to end today for Jubilees. But did you guys have any questions? And I see Gregory has come on last minute. Did you want to say anything? Any of you guys?
Well, I wanted to say, do you see this particular chapter here as like a overcap of everything from, not from the very beginning to the end, but somewhere along the way, all the way to the end? Do you see this as being like a general overview of the whole timeline?
I would say, but very general, because it doesn't focus on history per se. It focuses more on the law itself. We were reading Jubilees chapter 23, and that, I'm just saying this for Gregory, we were reading chapter 23 of Jubilees, which it speaks about how after Abraham died, how it was talking about why there's so much sickness and death in the world, and it's intimately connected with sin, and sin is violation of the law, according to Jubilees, and so it's because people were not keeping the law that so much death and illness was happening. And so this chapter is prophesying of the intimate connection between suffering and rejection of the law, and how they will keep suffering. Israel will keep suffering until they repent and turn to the law. Once they return to the law, all the suffering will be taken away, and they will be restored to their fullness. And that will ultimately be fulfilled when the Messiah comes back to set up the millennial kingdom. It doesn't specifically say Messiah in this chapter, but it's the context is referring to the end times of the restoration of Israel and the return to the law. So that's pretty much what we read about this chapter and what it's talking about, I believe. Hopefully that answers your question. Jackson, you want to say anything?
Yeah, I just want to say more people ought to be listening to this. They're interested in all kinds of theories, but here we get down to some basic textual matters that really seem to have a lot to do with not only today, but also is one of the lost books. Nobody really knows anything about this much. Maybe we can rouse up some more people here. Really should be. That's all. Thank you, Ounieh. It was great.
Yeah, sure thing. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, and we'll be here next week. What is it, 9 to 10, right?
Thank you, Ounieh. That was great.
If we ever need to reschedule, we will try to let everybody know, and we'll probably make a post in the group. But
hey,
yeah, it takes a while to get a new time like this up and going. It takes a while.
Yeah.
Man,
all right, guys. What were you saying, Allison?
That was great, man. This is the most integrated stuff that I've, in the last couple of weeks, this new session that you've been doing, this is the most integrated stuff I've ever heard you do, and I've listened to you for 3 years. This is really the good stuff. Thanks you so much.
Just want to let you know, I don't for these last few studies.
Do what?
I'm not doing any preparation. I'm just winging it.
I know, and that's the best way, you know?
Yeah,
really.
Sometimes that's the best way, and sometimes it's the worst way.
Yeah.
But you seem to be doing all right.